Gata for the sound of the bell. Mind calm, body at ease, breathing quiet, sentiment benevolent. Dharma friends, sitting still in vital silence, wanting nothing, we practice eco-Buddhism together. The sound of the temple bell booms for all to cease from conflict. May the way of Buddha usher in the dawn of non-violent global village forever. Here is the after sound of the bell. Thunder of silence, light after Dharma rain. Amoga. Varochana Mahamudra. Mani Padme Jvala Pravartaya.
Please stand for the chanting of the three refuges, followed by its recitation. I go for refuge to the Buddha
I go for refuge to the Buddha
and resolve with all beings.
and resolve with all beings.
I will
Cultivate.
I will cultivate a heart of enlightenment
I will cultivate a heart of enlightenment
and realize the great way.
and realize the great way.
I go for refuge to the Dharma
I go for refuge to the Dharma
and resolve with all beings.
and resolve with all beings.
I will penetrate the teachings
I will penetrate the teachings
and uncover oceans of wisdom.
and uncover oceans of wisdom.
I go for refuge to the Sangha
I go for refuge to the Sangha
and resolve with all beings.
and resolve with all beings.
I will seek peace and happiness for the many
I will seek peace and happiness for the many
and transform this world into Buddha lands unimpeded.
and transform this world into Buddha lands unimpeded.
Please return now for another period of meditation, about 5 minutes. And during that time, Hayun, our Dharma teacher, will take this seat as she will give the Dharma talk for us after our meditation.
Please follow along with these gentle stretching exercises. Reach to our head. Really feel your scalp, hair follicles.
Reading from the Dhammapada, the one who is awake. They are awake. The victory is theirs. They have conquered the world. How can they lose the way who are beyond the way? Their eyes are open. Their feet are free. Who can follow after them? The world cannot reclaim them or lead them astray, nor can the poisoned net of desire hold them. They are awake. The gods watch over them.
Sure is a lot happening in the world. Yesterday, I was outside and I saw this tree just filled with birds. Like every little twig on it was filled with birds. And one after another, these just flocks of birds flew off on their migration path. And they didn't have any hesitation. They didn't have any doubt. They just went. And I really admired that. You thought I was going to talk about the election, didn't you? Good morning, everyone. So a few weeks ago at the temple, I was kind of upset. I was upset about, I'd been to some meeting and I felt like there was a lack of sensibility or humility at the meeting. And so I said, I'm going to do a Dharma talk on humility. And as soon as the words spouted from my mouth, I realized how little humility I was showing by doing that. But I was sort of put on the spot at that point. And so I have pursued in my weak, fumbling ways. So I'm going to start by giving you another list. We have a lot of lists in Buddhism. So this list is the 4 qualities of a Dharma student. When I was a Dharma student, what I did was every single month, I took one of these qualities and worked with it every night in my journal. And it was just this like one after another, month after month after month, working with these things. And like all good Dharma students, I looked all over in encyclopedias, other faith traditions, because you're kind of desperate for what you can talk about in your journal after so many months of talking about these in your journal. So I'll just go over them. They're the 4 qualities technically of a Dharma student, but I just listed them as the 4 qualities because I really think they're for all of us. And they were developed by our founder, Samu Sunim, whose picture is behind me on the altar. So the first is what I'm going to be talking about today, humility. Pretty hard, pretty hard topic. The second is stability. I think most of us would say we've had a challenge with that lately in our lives. The third is gratitude. On its face, that seems a little easier. It's easier to offer gratitude for things. Even kids know if they don't offer gratitude, they probably won't get too many presents under the Christmas tree. So it's kind of more ingrained, although I think if you start peeling back the layers, it becomes more difficult. When you think of things like offering gratitude to ourselves, that's a little harder. And then the fourth is sincere heart. And I think when I was studying this, I kind of felt like this was more amorphous and something a little less in my control and more just dependent on my practice. So each of these has their own sort of really beautiful narrative about them in so many ways we can look into them. But today, I'm going to focus on the first one, humility. In some ways, I think that humility is the hardest one. First of all, unlike things like sincere heart and gratitude, it's not very fun. It's a little like me saying, well, let's put on our hair suit today and just, our like burlap sack and, try to be as tight-bud as we can and really appear very calm to people. And maybe it will start sinking in if we try hard enough. But it takes a lot of effort, it seems, so it's just not as much fun as some of the others. The other part is that what we find in our society, what I have found with myself, is when I project my ego, like I have at various times in my life, people are attracted to me. They say, wow, she's smart. She really knows her stuff. And this is a person who I'm going to follow because she really knows what she's talking about. So it's very seductive. And your ego is like something to grab onto because it's something that people really admire about you sometimes. The other part of humility that I find is really hard is obviously it's easy to talk about arrogance, and that's really in plain sight. But what's harder to discern about ourselves or other people is sort of a faux humility, I have a story. A couple weeks ago, I was at a student-teacher meeting, parent-teacher meeting for my daughter, Rory. And she has this math teacher, and math is one of her harder subjects. But this teacher's working with her, and so I met with him, and he was like talking about himself and all of his background, and I was just listening. And he said, people think I know this stuff, but I don't really know this stuff. And so I talked to Rory about it afterwards, and I'm like, does he talk like that often? Like, people think I know what I'm talking about, but I really don't. It seems a little bit like he wanted me to say, oh no, you really know what you're talking about, and to sort of inflate him like that. It's something we all do a lot. And I think it's just kind of our nature to do that. It shields our vulnerabilities, right? Because if people are building us up, it sort of shields us from really thinking about who we are once we sort of break ourselves down to our common denominators. The last piece that's hard with humility is that it's so easy for me to confuse humility with my sense of inadequacy in the world. Sometimes I feel like I'm being humble when actually, if I drill down, I'm really in this place of like feeling inadequate. There are a lot of pitfalls with humility, and I've done so much research on it. One of the definitions that I have really loved about humility, which I found in this religious journal somewhere, I'm sorry, I don't even have the reference to it, but it's come back to me a lot. So I wanted to share it with you. Humility is an outward expression of inner self-regard. I'm going to read it again. Humility is an outward expression of inner self-regard. So whereas feelings of inadequacy are an imposition of shame on ourselves, humility is actually just the opposite of that. It's our own sense of self-possession and ourself in the world, and feeling comfortable with ourself in the world, as opposed to going to that place of shame and feeling like if we project that shame, people are going to like us more or feel that we're more humble. And the other thing is, that I mentioned before, is that faux humility is really just a show for others, to make us feel, oh, that person's really humble. When in fact, what they're doing is shielding themselves from us, so that it's hard to see their true feelings and what they're really going through and what sort of connects us as human beings. So I wanted to share some Buddhist stories with you, varying levels of humility. The first story is about someone called the Diamond Sutra King. Way back, when Zen was just being created, Mahayana had just come to China. There were two schools. One was in the north, and they focused a lot. They were very sincere practitioners. They had a lot of sincere heart. They focused on study a lot, understanding the sutras, really getting into the sutras. And they heard about this teacher in the south of China who was doing kind of a radical experiment. As it turns out, he was one of the very first Zen masters. And his whole thing was, books can only get you so far. You really have to turn away from the books, turn away from your knowledge, and really, really focus on practice. So when our hero from the north, he's my hero, he had written all these books. He was a great scholar on one of our most important sutras called the Diamond Sutra. Books and books, and people really admired him because he just had a lot of intelligence and a lot of great insight into the Diamond Sutra. And it's a hard sutra to understand or even begin to comprehend, so people appreciated his words. But when he heard about this fellow in the south, who really wasn't about words at all, who just felt like practice was what would get us there, he got very upset. It kind of insulted who he was as an academic, and he was kind of harumph. So he set off with his books on his shoulder, and he said, I'm going to teach this guy a lesson. I'm going to go talk to this man in the south, and I'm going to set him straight, because I am the Diamond Sutra King. So of course they didn't have superhighways then. So he had to take his books on his back and go on this long, long journey to the south of China. And he finally gets to the base of this mountain. There's a small mountain, those gumdrop mountains in the south of China. And so on this mountain was a little monastery that this Zen master ran. So he was exhausted from his trip. So he stopped in a little shop. In some stories, it's a tea shop. In other stories, it's a noodles shop. I'm going to go with the noodles. So there was this really humble older woman who ran the noodle shop. And she saw him with all of his books, and he'd obviously come a long way. He says, "Oh, could I get you something, sir? You must be very noble. I see all the books you carry with you." And he said, "I'm the Diamond Sutra King. Of course I am very noble. I know a lot of things." And she said, oh gosh, well, that's very impressive. I am very honored to meet you. I will give you these noodles for free on the house. If you can just answer one question for me that's really puzzled me about the Diamond Sutra. I said, well, certainly, I have deep insight into the Diamond Sutra. And so she said, well, so the Diamond Sutra says, past mind cannot be found. Present mind cannot be found. Future mind cannot be found. So tell me, dear sir, with which mind do you enjoy your noodles? He was silent. He was silent some more. And he started to get flushed, kind of the same way I do. Red in the face, about to bust. Then he got purple. And he finally just blurted out, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. And he said to her, where do you get this wisdom to ask a question like this? And then she pointed up the mountain and she said, from the master on the mountain. And here's what the lesson of humility is and why this man is my hero in many ways. He then basically tossed aside his books and he went to study with the master on the mountain, and he became an amazing Zen master himself. But it took him probably just amazing amounts of courage to give up all that was his identity, everything that defined him, in search of the truth. And he did that and was able to do that. The question we have to ask ourselves every day is, do we have the courage that this man did? Obviously, it's easy to laugh at him and say, oh, he was so arrogant. He was the personification of arrogance and pride. And yet, what was beautiful about him was that he was able to understand his lack of wisdom. And he was able to go study the Dharma in a way that was real. So the second story, that's the Diamond Sutra King. The second story I wanted to talk to you about even comes from farther back. It's one of my favorite Jataka tales. I don't know all of them. There's over 500 of them. And a lot of times they're known as kids' stories, but they're not kids' stories. They're just wonderful kind of representations of how, when there was difficulty in the community, the Buddha would use these stories to teach lessons. And sometimes the tales themselves, which are sort of the Buddha in his prior incarnations, his lives in the past, sometimes those are the real kind of exceptional piece of it. And sometimes the community goings on were the exceptional pieces of it, because it's fascinating to see way back in the Buddha's time, they pretty much had the same issues we have to deal with today. And so that's why they offer us such amazing lessons. So this Jataka tale is called the Kulapantaka Jataka. And it involves a family that lived in northern India where the Buddha lived. And it wasn't called that at that point, but that's where it was. And there were two brothers. One was Analapantaka, and then his younger brother was Kulapantaka. And Analapantaka and his uncle at one point went to see the Buddha teach on a mountain. And Analapantaka came home and said, "That's it, I'm leaving, I'm going to be a monk, I'm going to follow the Buddha." I guess it shows us how much charisma the Buddha had, that he was able to just like, people would be so enamored after hearing one talk that they would just give up their lives and go. So Analapantaka went to be a monk, and he actually rose to quite an amazing stature. He rose very quickly because he was very smart and he was very earnest, and he was devoted to his practice. So he became sort of one of the senior people. There were about 500 monks at that point living there. He became one of the senior people, doing the job of organizing like activities with the outside world. Like there would be big donors who would want the Buddha to come for dinner, but that meant that all 500 monks came too. So they had to do a lot of organization about that. But so he became like a big guy. But he came home to visit, and he told, so Kulapantaka, who was about maybe 14, 15, got really excited. So he wanted to go become a monk too. So he went with his brother Analapantaka, and he became a monk. So part of what a monk had to do, all monks, was to do a lot of memorization of sutras, because of course there was no written word at that point. So it really was an oral tradition, and it was so important that they learn it. And actually, still in some Buddhist traditions, there's a lot of oral tradition of memorization, passing it down. We kind of have that here a little bit, but they had it more then. So they had a lot to memorize. So the plot sort of thickens when you know that in a prior life, Kulapantaka had made fun of someone because they couldn't remember something. So Kulapantaka in his life couldn't remember any of the sutras. Like he would sit there all day and try to memorize a line, and then he just couldn't remember it. And he just would try and try because he loved it there, and he just so wanted to succeed, but he couldn't remember anything. And so he became kind of a butt of jokes, kind of like, oh my God, who's that guy? Can't memorize anything. And it was kind of dooming him because that was their job. So his brother, Analapantaka, heard about this, and he felt ashamed because he obviously had brought his brother, and his brother was kind of not succeeding in a big way. And so he felt ashamed, and he got very upset. And then Kulapantaka also was ashamed of himself. Talk about feelings of inadequacy. Oh my gosh, this was his life, and he couldn't do it, couldn't remember anything. And so he just felt really badly. And he also felt like he was letting his brother down. That was hard too. So one day, the whole Sangha, all 500 monks, led by the Buddha, were invited to a big donor's compound kind of thing for dinner, which was probably lunch at that point. But so everybody goes, and there was one name left off the list, and of course Analapantaka put the list together, and the only name he didn't put on was his younger brother Kulapantaka, because he was so ashamed of him. Yeah. So Kulapantaka found out about this, and he's like, that's it, I gotta go. This isn't the life for me. I'm gonna go back to my family. So he's packing his little satchel, like I imagine the people who like rode the rail cars or something, like on his back. He didn't have much, and he's packing in his little hut, and he hears a knock on the door. This is when all the monks are away. They're all at the grand thing. Knock on the door. He's like, oh gosh, I I just want to get away. And he opens the door, and who is it? It's the Buddha at his door. And he's like, oh, Buddha, come in. Master, you're here. And he was just shell-shocked. And so the Buddha walked into his little hut, and he sees his clothes and his little thing. He wraps the clothes in. He's like, what's going on? What are you doing? He's like, oh, Master, I can't remember anything. I'm a failure. I don't remember anything. And the Buddha said to him, and these are the words I love, he said, Kalapantaka, your place is not out there. It's here with me. And he gave him these exercises to help him see the impermanence of all things, including his lack of memorization ability. And Kalapantaka really worked with that. The Buddha went on, of course, to the dinner. And he just worked, and he worked all through the night. And lo and behold, at the end of the night, he attained enlightenment. And he saw the nature of all things, including his own impermanence. And at that point also, conveniently, poof, all the sutras came into his head, and he knew everything. And so Kalapantaka transformed his feelings of inadequacy into feelings of gigantic humility. He transformed that into that sort of, what I said here, the outward expression of inner self-regard. And Kalapantaka went on to be a great, great teacher and leader in the Sangha. So I felt those two stories really help us to get a handle on what we go through in terms of these issues that kind of beleaguer us. And it's hard, as I said in the beginning. I think that humility of these four qualities really is very, very difficult, because we end up, our little ships go from a lack of self-esteem to feeling like we have to put on this faux humility sometimes, and achieving that inner self-regard is really hard. So I've thought a long time about it. I'm like, well, why do we work so hard on this? What is the real value? Because, if the opposite of humility is bravado, if the opposite of humility is arrogance, well, I don't really feel like I have so much bravado and arrogance. So, why do I have to continue working on this? What is the lesson for me in this? And, I've come to a real reason for myself about why it's so important to continue to work on this. Because I don't see the opposite of humility being arrogance. I see the opposite of humility being the times when I judge other people, the times when I have strong opinions that are not based on my values, but are based on my fears and my sort of lack of inward self-regard. And so I've continued to work on it because I really feel like pursuing the constant sort of looking at humility in myself helps me to get a little closer to the goal of having that inner self-regard that's unencumbered by what other people are doing, that I have judgments about, unless those judgments are based on my own compassion and my own deep moral conviction. And it's only through my practice that I can start understanding the difference between the two. I wanted to read to you a Rumi quote. Rumi was the great Hindu philosopher. He said a lot of good things, but I really love this quote, and it seems to really fit my idea of why humility is so important to pursue. Rumi says, "Out beyond our ideas of right and wrong, there is a field. I'll meet you there. when our spirit lies down in the grass, the world is too full to talk about. Words fall short. I want to talk a little bit about my story and how I came to this. At one point in my life, I had, all the big degrees from the big colleges. I had, not the big colleges, but big colleges. I was, heading up this big multi-million-dollar agency. I sat on the boards of many organizations. People really viewed me as someone who had a lot of intelligence and insight. Like, oh gosh, she must know a lot. She must really be kind of someone I want to follow because she's really intelligent, really knows a lot, and really someone who other people should follow. All the right pedigree. So I gave that up. That's a whole story for another time, but I gave that up to come back to Michigan and be a cheesemaker. So I traded in a lot of my cachet about what I talked about before, why people would be attracted to me because of my intelligence and my wit and my cleverness, for a life of really using my hands. I've talked about this before, about our tradition of pulsa, of using our hands to channel our practice. And so when I'm not making cheese with my hands at home, I'm actually here at the temple working on a mosaic piece that I'm doing. So it's just a lot of intense working with my hands. And I don't have any, there's no sort of like cachet of like, oh my gosh, she's so clever, she's so intelligent, because I'm really just working with my hands, which I really love doing. And the reason I love doing it is because I think I've traded my value of intelligence for my value of wisdom. And the wisdom that I think I've found is about bit by bit coming closer to understanding and being comfortable with my place in the world without having to impress other people. How smart I am, how clever I am. Because if I am, I am. If I'm not, I'm not. Lots of times I just bomb. That's okay too. But so I think that letting go of those notions of what, whether you work with your hands or your head, there's no judgments about which is better. It's just a matter of sometimes it's good to get out of our head, because then we get out of those preconceived notions and we begin to see our place in the world is not so much different than every other person's place in the world, and that allows us to harmonize together. Yeah. So the last thing I'd like to talk about, or just end with, is one of our pieces from our liturgy book, the Metta Sutta. So I think that's so perfectly suited to a talk on humility. Most of you have heard this. It's one of our more common recitations from our liturgy book. And we all have a place that we remember hearing it that really sort of grounds us. For me, that place is at Peace Camp, where I vividly remember Joanne Kelleher, like really earnestly reciting the Metta Sutta, and it just gives me a smile on my face whenever I remember her doing it. So think of that place that grounds you to the Metta Sutta, and if you know it, recite it along with me. If you don't know it, just listen deeply with your heart. And ring the bell at the beginning and the end. Metta Sutta, meditation on loving kindness. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety. May all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, the weak and the strong, omitting none, the great and the mighty, medium, short, and small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born. May all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another, nor despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a parent protects with their life their child, their only child, so should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness throughout the universe, upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking or seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. So now, in a twist, I'm going to throw the ball in the air and toss it to myself to give announcements. So we have several really, really cool things going on, and one very poignant thing that's coming up, which I'll talk about first. We are having next Sunday here at 3 p.m. a memorial service for Lucy L'Esperance. Lucy is Teresa L'Esperance's mom. You may remember Teresa gave the Dharma talk last week. She is a Dharma guardian, and she is also with her husband Nojak, a leader in the family program and in peace camp. And she has two beautiful children, Gus and Lily. So they'll be here, we'll be here. If you know Teresa and Nojak, or even if you don't, and you'd like to come pay your respects, we're going to do it outside in a very responsible, socially distanced way. Please wear a mask. But if you'd like to participate, you are welcome to do so. It's 3 p.m. next Saturday. Sunday. I'm thinking about Saturday because the Saturday before, next Saturday, we're going to be doing a special outside work project preparing the grounds for this memorial service. So if you have any availability between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. next Saturday, please join us. You can call a temple or email us, Ann Arbor Zen Temple @gmail.com, or call us at 761-6520, area code 734. And please come out and help us, because even if you don't intend to come to the memorial, it's a great way to offer your dana and generosity. Secondly, I wanted to tell you that we are going to be partnering with an organization in Ypsilanti called the Hope Clinic. This is an organization which provides food and medicines to our neighbors who do not have the means to pay for it themselves in Washtenaw County. And we are really grateful to Julie Angeli for setting up this partnership for us. It's going to be starting not this week, but the next week. We're going to have a box that's going to be marked Hope Clinic on the front porch of the temple. And they need anything you could provide, from ibuprofen to acetaminophen to aspirin, children and adults versions of that, toothpaste, toothbrushes, anything basically that's in your medicine cabinet, they can use to help people in need. So we're going to try this partnership, and we're really excited about it. It came out of our talks at our inclusivity meetings that we've had recently with a few people. We're going to be expanding those too online, but this was one idea that came out of it, and we're really, really excited to be able to not only partner with this group, but also to have a project where we as a temple and as a sangha can really help our neighbors in need. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that we do have Recovery Dharma that is at noon, each Sunday after this service. So you, in the e-bulletin, you can click on the link for that. I think most of you have it. So that's the other thing. Is there anything I'm missing? We're going to be starting yoga soon. We just don't have the details yet. But when we do, we will let you know. That will be virtual, obviously. And so we're going to be looking at what kinds of things we can do soon in the future to expand our virtual offerings to you. And so I think that's it for announcements, other than to say thank you, thank you, thank you for your continued generosity and supporting the temple and supporting our work in the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of all that we're going through and all the struggles. And we just so appreciate your support and help. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Haji Sunim to lead us in the 4 great vows to end this service.
Please take a moment to bring your hands together so you can feel this kind of intimacy and just being in this position that we call Hapchon. And breath awareness, not just in the nose, the throat, and the lungs, but even beyond the whole body. As we recite together these impossible and wonderful vows. All beings, one body. All beings,
one body.
I vow to liberate.
I vow to liberate.
Blind passions, one root.
Blind passions, one root.
I vow to terminate.
I vow to terminate.
Dharma gates, one mind.
Dharma gates, one mind.
I vow to penetrate.
I vow to penetrate.
The great way of Buddha.
The great way of Buddha.
I vow to realize.
I vow to realize.
Thank you for being with us this morning.